Alright, I did a bunch of research when I very first bought my 1.9 TDI about EGR deletes and why you do an EGR delete, and although the internet has all the information you would want, I found it was all coming from different sources. People had different opinions, and I just figured I'd make a video that runs through the entire process of an EGR delete on a 1.9 TDI. It's probably relevant to a lot of other cars as well, the main overall idea of what an EGR delete does, but I figured I'd make like the ultimate guide basically to doing a 1.9 TDI EGR delete. Now I will say this is quite a long video and I'll have it all broken down into segments. What you are looking at in the center of the frame right there is in fact the standard EGR on a 1.9 TDI, this particular model being a BXE engine in a Mark V, however they're all basically the same. Over here in the shadows is a 1.9 TDI AXR, again EGR looks the same. So what exactly is the purpose behind an EGR and what does the EGR system do? Well, you'll notice this in fact is the exhaust manifold here on the back of a 1.9 TDI, and this has a blanking plate on it. Normally there would be a pipe coming out of the exhaust manifold here which will go to a cooler which will cool the exhaust gases before recirculating it into the intake system. Basically, the engine is breathing in a percentage of its own exhaust fumes. Soot and all the soot particles are going back through the inlet and mixing with the oil residue from the PCV system, which basically will cause the backs of the valves, all the inlet manifold to carbon up and can lead to power loss. Especially if you're chasing high power, this can hurt performance. So when you're doing an EGR delete, are there different types? Well, absolutely. Some people will remove the EGR entirely and the anti-shudder valve and replace it with a straight through race pipe just like this one here. The benefits of this are simple, effective, and it basically is the most common for that exact reason. Now, other types there are, people will just remove the vacuum line from the EGR, and without tuning, this will throw engine codes. The other side of that is you could also get it tuned out and leave the vacuum line connected, so basically the EGR system will not open the valve. But the best option, which I think is probably the least commonly done option, is what I'm going to be doing in today's video. Now, this is what I'm going to be fitting in today's video. This is another EGR delete pipe. This is a different type though. Unlike the one I just showed you, this doesn't remove the anti-shudder valve. Now, for a daily driver, not that this vehicle is, of course this is for off-road use only, but for a daily driver, this style is perfect because it retains the anti-shudder valve, which means when you turn the vehicle off, there's a valve that closes slowly that allows the vehicle to turn off smoothly. When you have a race pipe like the one that I just showed you before and you turn the engine off, the whole thing will shake like crazy. That, if you have standard engine mounts, will lead to fatigue on them and wear them out rather quickly, whereas this style retaining the anti-shudder valve will basically make no difference to anything noticeable other than the EGR itself being removed. There won't be any consequences of the EGR delete. Now, not only am I doing the probably best way to do an EGR delete by maintaining the anti-shudder valve, I'm taking it one step further and simplifying the vacuum setup. Most people, when they do an EGR delete, will just fold over and zip tie the vacuum line that goes to the EGR so there isn't a vacuum leak. However, you can take it one step further and simplify the entire engine by installing an N75 valve. This one here is from Pierberg and the part number will be on the screen. So if you want to go buy one of these, that's the part number right there. As well as that, I've also got the adapter harness here from Darkside Developments, which I'll be fitting. Basically, it converts the standard 6-pin vacuum box to a simple 2-pin plug, which is exactly what we'll be installing in the car, which literally has a vacuum in, a turbo out, and a vent. The benefits to doing it this way is you delete a bunch of vacuum lines that become unnecessary when you have no EGR that needs to be controlled. The anti-shudder valve is electric. The only other thing it controls is the EGR cooler and the vacuum ball, which an N75 like this, although most people recommend using a T and maintaining the vacuum ball, I've had great success with just deleting it and simplifying it as much as possible. So I say that's enough of the waffling. Now let's go over to the car and start to remove the EGR. So as shown before, the EGR is over here. The anti-shudder valve is on the end, which we're going to have to remove first to get to the EGR itself. Once that's gone, we're going to remove the PCV hose here, and we're also going to remove the inlet pipe as the EGR and EGR cooler are buried behind it there. And this big vacuum box at the back here with several vacuum lines coming from it is the massive box that we're going to be simplifying. All these vacuum lines you see across the bottom of the frame here are all going to be removed. So time we get stuck into it and start removing some of these parts. Alright, so we're now slightly later. As you'll notice, I have removed the boost pipe leading up to the anti-shudder valve, and I've removed the anti-shudder valve itself. What remains is the EGR, and the bottom bolt on the EGR is quite difficult to get to. What you'll actually need to do, and I don't know if it's visible here, but you'll have to remove the pipe underneath that goes up into the EGR, which is what feeds it the exhaust gases, as that blocks the third and final bolt of the EGR. Easiest way to do that I've found is to remove this 10mm here, and if you follow the inlet pipe down, there is another 10mm down there, both of which are very easy access, and I was able to get this in here with a 6mm Allen to get both of the bolts off the back. Once you've got that inlet pipe out the way, you'll see this EGR pipe located on top of the rocker cover currently, and what you'll already have undone is those two screws there in order to get the EGR out. This side over here, these two screws, if you remove them, makes your life 10 times easier to just pull this pipe out of the way, and then you can get the final EGR bolt out. And once you've got that final EGR bolt out, it's on to removing the EGR cooler, which I've already done. So let's have a look at it and how it's oriented and show you exactly where the bolts are to remove. This is the EGR cooler, and this is how it sits against the block. So underneath where the EGR pipe is itself, you're going to get this screw here. There's one on top which is very easy access. This one here I found easy to get with a long extension leaning right over the back. And finally, there'll be a little sneaky one just here that you'll have to access from where the airbox would have been. Once you remove those 4 bolts, the actual EGR cooler itself is good to be removed. But if you want to pull out with the pipe, two 12mm, not a very common size on Volkswagen, two 12mm bolts there will remove, or nuts there will remove the EGR pipe from the manifold. Once that's removed, you'll have the 2 studs hanging out of the manifold like you see here, and an open inlet which goes into the exhaust manifold itself. This will get a blanking plate, which should be included with your EGR kit. This pipe here goes through into the EGR and then loops back out. You want to cut this pipe short and then put this straight into the block right behind the tandem pump. That will bypass how it would have gone through the EGR cooler, and that's nice and simple. And when you're doing this, try to make sure that you're orienting the pipes so that everything can be clipped in and it looks as OEM as possible. Likewise here with this bottom pipe that comes out of this plastic housing on the block. This pipe here does go into the EGR cooler, and then as it goes out of the EGR cooler, it goes into the heater core. Now, that pipe obviously will now need to be bypassed. So how do you do that? Now, this is the pipe that would have been there, and as you can see, it has a nice 90-degree turn to it. If you get a straight one of these, the pipe that actually had gone to the EGR can be rotated and be used with a straight one of these to just completely delete it and give an OEM look. Obviously the connector's brand new and there's no dirt on it, but as you can see back there, it looks completely OEM. Once this gets a few thousand Ks on it and gets a bit dirty, you'll actually never be able to tell that there is, you know, pipe work that's been modified here. So although it looks like a little bit of a dog's breakfast back there, that is actually the vacuum setup completely ready to go. I'm now going to start putting the things back together. All right, and as you can see, I've now got everything back together and all tidied up. I've also given the engine bay a bit of a detail, so it's looking very nice under here. N75 valve is in place, and I have actually refitted the vacuum ball. I figured it's probably best that I leave it there, as it gives some vacuum reserve just in case it's at low RPM and there's no vacuum when it needs it. I'd rather be safe than sorry. So at the bottom left of the frame there, you'll be able to see the T-piece, one coming from the tandem pump, and the other one going over to the vacuum ball and then into the N75. The EGR Delete that retains the anti-shudder valve is all fitted up as well, and it is perfectly functional. The anti-shudder valve is still aiding in a smooth shutoff for the engine. Those with a keen eye will notice the PCV pipe is completely different, and there is a good reason for that, which is a little bit on the embarrassing side. This inlet manifold is actually off a Polo 9N3, as when I tightened the top EGR bolt, the really long one that goes right the way through, I actually cracked the inlet manifold. And well, if you know anything about having a big crack in somewhere like that that's pressurized, it's not something you can get away with. So I've actually fitted a Polo 9N3 inlet manifold, cleaned that up, and as a consequence of that, pushed that inlet pipe back further, so I had to come up with something for the PCV pipe, which I've done with this silicone hose. That's it, the EGR Delete is fitted and the anti-shudder valve is retained. Basically, it's going to help this engine to last a lot longer. It's just deleting a bunch of things that are actually bad and hurting the engine, as well as simplifying things that can cause leaks and issues with oil and coolant mixing. And ever since I've had this car, even after the tune, I've been having issues with a hot start, just being a bit spluttery and stuttery. I actually put that down to the dual mass flywheel starting to go bad. However, this EGR Delete seems to have actually assisted with that. It seems to start up a lot nicer. However, I think there's still an underlying dual mass flywheel fault. But that's it. That's my complete EGR Delete guide on a 1.9 TDI. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have, make sure you chuck a like on it. With that said, subscribe to the channel because there's still going to be plenty more 1.9 content coming soon. And with that said, I'll catch you in the next video.